The alarm had been screaming for 11 minutes before anyone aboard Tessellate admitted they couldn't stop it. Not a malfunction alarm. Not a proximity klaxon. The other kind. The one the Veth called the sorrow frequency. The acoustic pattern they'd embedded in every ship commissioned under the joint armistice fleet for exactly this scenario. The sound meant a human was dying, and it was taking too long. Chief Liaison Maren Osei pressed both palms flat against the cold alloy of the corridor wall and made herself breathe. Around her, the ship's Veth crew moved with the fluid, jointless grace of creatures that had never experienced physical pain, their bioluminescent spines cycling from pale gold to agitated violet as the sound continued. One of them, a navigator named something Maren's vocal anatomy couldn't reproduce, stopped in the passage ahead and regarded her with four independently rotating eyes. The frequency, it said, through the translation collar at its throat, indicates distress. You are distressed. The frequency is correct. The frequency, Maren said, is making everything worse. Is designed to make things worse, the navigator said, so that someone will fix them faster. This is a pause. Color shift, 3 of the 4 eyes swiveling inward in what Maren had learned to read as the Veth equivalent of consulting a memory. This is considered elegant by your people, yes? Creating urgency. Not when I'm the one who has to walk into that room. The navigator considered this. It's 4th I found her again. We did not expect the human to survive the decompression event. That it has survived this long is already. Another pause, a longer one. The spine lights going a deep, uncertain blue. Outside our models. Our medics cannot explain it. They are frightened. Maren pushed off the wall. Good, she said. That means I still have something to work with. 19 hours earlier, Tessellate had been doing exactly what a joint armistice fleet vessel was supposed to do. Nothing efficiently. The armistice was 8 years old. The war, or the reclassification, as the Veth still officially called it, because they'd never managed to make peace with the fact that they'd declared war on a species they'd misidentified as unintelligent, had been over for most of a decade. Joint patrol ships like Tessellate existed to demonstrate that the ceasefire had teeth, that both species were invested in a holding, that neither side was building something terrible along the border corridors while smiling at trade summits. In practice, what this meant was 22 Veth crew members and 3 human liaisons spending 16-month deployments in deep transit lanes, conducting inspections that nobody failed, filing reports that nobody read, and very carefully learning to exist in the same pressurized space, without anyone doing anything catastrophic. Maren had been doing this for 6 years. She'd had 2 postings before Tessellate, both uneventful by any measure that mattered. She was considered good at this work, which mostly meant she was good at staying calm in rooms where the atmosphere was 11% higher and xenon than human optimal, and the ambient light tilted toward frequencies her eyes half-registered as threat colors. She was good at eating Veth ration supplements that tasted like battery acid and mineral salt and saying something culturally appropriate about the experience. She was good at the 1,000 daily negotiations that nobody ever put in any treaty document because they were the negotiations that kept you from needing a treaty document. She was not, until now, someone who needed to be good at anything else. The mission that had gone wrong was a routine relay inspection. 3rd time this route. The communications relay at Corridor Marker J. 7 had been flagging intermittent signal loss for 3 weeks. Maren had read the diagnostic report twice, understood maybe a third of it, and signed off on the inspection as standard. The Veth crew had their own experts. She was here as a legal presence, a warm body whose existence confirmed that both parties had agreed to board the structure. Her colleague, Senior Liaison Declan had been the one to actually suit up. That had been Maren's decision. She'd been rotating through inspection duties evenly for the entire posting. She and Declan and the 3rd liaison, a quiet young man named Declan, who was on his first posting and still occasionally forgot to close his expression when the Veth said something that surprised him. Elon was scheduled off rotation. It had been Maren's turn, but Declan had offered casually, over the terrible xenon atmosphere coffee that Maren had stopped tasting around month 4, said he'd cover it. She looked tired. He wanted the EVA hours anyway. She'd said yes. 40 minutes later, the relay exploded. Not a catastrophic explosion. Not the kind that took everything with it. A contained rupture in one of the relay's secondary power conduits. A failure mode the diagnostic report had apparently categorized as unlikely but possible, which Maren had read as not our problem today. Because she'd been doing this long enough to trust those assessments. Because nothing ever actually went wrong on a routine inspection. The rupture had vented a superheated gas jet through the relay's exterior service corridor at the exact moment Declan was moving through it. He hadn't been hit directly. The suit had taken the thermal burst, but the force had thrown him into the relay's outer hull hard enough to compromise his helmet seal, and then the relay's containment protocols had triggered, sealing the external corridor and venting it to vacuum in a safety measure that was, as the Veth crew explained it afterward with the specific careful blankness they used when something had gone badly wrong. Standard procedure. Declan had been in vacuum for approximately 4 minutes before the Veth managed to override the containment protocol and recover him. He was alive. He was, by any model the Veth medical crew possessed, not supposed to be. The medical bay on a Veth ship was not designed for human anatomy in any way that a human would find comforting. The surfaces were wrong, too smooth, too reflective, calibrated for a species whose bodies ran at different chemical equilibrium. The lighting shifted constantly in the upper spectrum, tracking whatever biological process the Veth medics were monitoring. The equipment looked, to Maren's eye, like something grown rather than manufactured, dense branching structures of what appeared to be calcified cartilage that had been threaded through with conductive filament. Declan was in the center of it, and something that wasn't quite a bed, more like a contoured shelf of warm bioplastic that had partially shaped itself around him. He was conscious, which was the first thing Maren checked. His eyes tracked her when she came through the entrance. "Hey," he said. His voice was rough, abraded. For minutes of vacuum did things to the tissues of the throat. "Hey," she said. "They keep looking at me," he said, "like I'm doing something wrong." 3 Veth medics were doing exactly that, arranged at a distance that probably felt tactful to them, their spine lights cycling through patterns Maren didn't have the vocabulary for. One of them had a recording device aimed at Declan with the specific focused attention of a scientist documenting something unprecedented. "You survived 4 minutes of vacuum exposure," Maren said. "They've never seen that before." "I've read the literature," Declan said. "Technically, it's not supposed to be survivable." "I know." The suit helped. The emergency seal. December. Partially held. I think. Honestly, it's a little blurry. "I know." Maren pulled a stool close and sat down. The Veth medics didn't move. "I need to know what you need me to do right now. Not treatment decisions. The medics are handling that. I mean..." She stopped. "I need to know what I can do." Declan was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to the ceiling, not avoiding her. She knew him well enough to know the difference, just processing. "The report," he said. "Yes. It's going to say that human error contributed." "Possibly. The relay diagnostic flagged the conduit." "I know. We cleared it anyway." "Declan." He looked at her then. "I'm not..." A pause. Something moving through his expression that she couldn't quite read. "I'm not saying it to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because when you write the report, you need to write it accurately. Whatever the conduit assessment said, we cleared it. That's the chain. Don't write around it." Maren looked at him for a long moment. The alarm frequency was still running through the ship's PA. It had quieted to a lower register now that Declan was stable, but it hadn't stopped, because the Veth concept of distress resolution apparently required a formal medical declaration that she couldn't issue, and the head medic kept deferring, because Declan's continued survival was confusing its models. "You're lecturing me on report accuracy," she said, "while you're lying on a bioplastic shelf after 4 minutes in vacuum." "Someone has to." His mouth moved in something that was technically a smile. "You look terrible, by the way." "Thank you. Go sleep." "I have to." "Maren, the medics aren't going to do anything they haven't already done. Elon is handling the immediate communications. I know you. Go sleep for 6 hours. Come back. Then do everything you need to do. You're no good to me in this state." the chief Veth medic, who communicated through a combination of the translation collar and a secondary subvocal array that produced a slightly eerie harmonic underneath its words, moved closer. The injured human's physiology has stabilized to a degree we find its search for the word, spine lights going a thoughtful amber. Incomprehensible. We are monitoring continuously. Rest is advised for non-critical personnel. Maren looked at the medic. She looked at Declan. 6 hours, she said. 6 hours, he agreed. She was gone for 4 before Elon called her. The problem had emerged in the second hour of her sleep. It wasn't a medical problem. Declan was stable, still and probably alive, his biology doing whatever impossible thing it was doing. The problem was the Veth Command Council. Specifically, it was the Veth Command Council's sudden and forceful interest in how the relay inspection had been authorized. Elon, to his credit, had handled the initial contact. He'd woken Maren with a message that was admirably efficient. Council inquiry inbound, official channels. They want the chain of authorization. I've given them what I have. They want a senior liaison. Please advise. Below it, almost as an afterthought. Also, Dec is still alive, which they seem very bothered by. Maren was on the bridge in 30 minutes. The Veth Council communication was being managed by the ship's senior command officer, a Veth of significant rank whose name translated, roughly, as the one who holds the thread, which Maren had privately been rendering as thread for the last 14 months, because nobody had told her that was offensive. Thread was tall even by Veth standards, its spine lights running and steady, controlled patterns that meant either extreme calm or extreme suppression of not calm, and Maren had never quite learned to tell the difference. Chief Liaison, it said when she entered. The Council requests a formal accounting. Of the relay inspection or of Declan surviving it? Threads for eyes cycled through different focal points in sequence. Both, it said, but primarily the survival. The relay failure is cataloged. The survival is. Its spine lights went that uncertain blue again. A data irregularity. He's not a data irregularity. He's my colleague. Yes, the Council is aware. It wishes to understand the mechanism. Maren sat down at the bridge liaison station and looked at the Council feed. 3 Veth Council members in their remote frames, spine lights all cycling in coordinated rhythms that suggested either consultation or argument. She'd been doing this 6 years, and she still couldn't always tell. One of them spoke first. Liaison Osei. The human male designated Declan Cha experienced 4.2 minutes of vacuum exposure following seal compromise. Our biological assessments indicate this should have resulted in death, Maren said. I've read the assessments. Your colleague did not die. I'm aware. Our medical crew has documented his recovery progress over the last. I know. I was there. A pause. Council members conferring with each other in the subvocal register that the translation systems didn't catch. Maren could see the micro-movements in their throat structures, the rapid spine light exchanges. Then, Liaison Osei, we are attempting to understand whether this is a property of your species that was not fully disclosed during armistice negotiations. The bridge went very quiet. Maren kept her face still. 6 years of practice. Could you, she said carefully, be more specific about what you mean by not fully disclosed? Resilience parameters, the Council member said. Survivability thresholds. The capacity to endure conditions assessed as lethal. You're asking if humans knew we could survive vacuum exposure. We're asking whether this was known and withheld. Nobody survives 4 minutes of vacuum exposure, Maren said. That's not something we withheld because there's nothing to withhold. Dec survived something that we didn't think was survivable either. We're as surprised as you are. Our models. Your models weren't built on human biology. We weren't part of her modeling process until... She stopped herself. Until the reclassification. Another silence. The Council member's spine lights were doing something she'd never seen before. A rapid cycling through multiple frequencies in a pattern that looked almost like static. Thread said quietly from behind her, "This is, I believe, the difficulty." Maren turned. During the reclassification, Thread said, and it used the Veth word, not the translation, which meant it was being precise. We assessed your species. We built models. We continue to build models. Liaison survival does not fit any model we have constructed in 8 years of detailed observation. So you want to understand it. We need to understand it. Thread spine lights went steady, controlled. That ambiguous calm or suppression. The armistice is built on mutual legibility. We require that both parties be knowable to each other. If humanity's parameters extend beyond what was disclosed, intentionally or not, then the legibility framework is compromised. Maren looked at Thread for a long moment. Then she looked at the council feed, at 3 Veth officials whose body language she could read maybe 60% of the time on a good day. Can I ask you something? She said. This is encouraged, Thread said, when you built your models of humanity, your assessments of our parameters, your survivability thresholds and resilience frameworks, and all of that. She paused. Did you ask us? A silence. We observed, one of the council members said. Right, you observed. 8 years of observation, plus however long before the war that you were watching us and categorizing us. She kept her voice level, measured, and you built a very complete picture, very detailed. And now Dec is lying in your medical bay surviving something your picture said he couldn't survive, and that feels like a problem with him, or with us. It is a data irregularity, the council member said again, more carefully. It's a miracle, Maren said. In our framework, not yours. In our way of understanding what bodies can and can't do. What Declan did is not a data point. It's a miracle, and we don't have a model for it either. We just have the fact of it. She let that sit. Maybe that's worth something. The fact that we're both sitting here without a model for what just happened. Maybe that's actually... She searched for the right word, found it. Legible. The spine light patterns of all 3 council members shifted simultaneously. It was the first time in 6 years that Maren had seen that happen. The argument that followed was 4 hours long and went in 7 different directions and solved almost nothing in any practical sense, which was, in Maren's experience, exactly what it was supposed to do. Real diplomatic progress didn't look like resolution. It looked like 2 parties talking until they were too tired to be guarded, and something accidental got through. What got through, in the 4th hour, was this. The Veth concept of sorrow frequency. The alarm that had been running through Tessellate since the moment Declan's vital signs had gone critical was not, as Maren had assumed, simply a distress signal. She'd learned this from Elon, of all people, who had apparently spent the crisis period doing research instead of sleeping, because he was 24 and operating on first-posting adrenaline and couldn't shut his brain off. It's a morning frequency, Elon told her in the corridor outside the medical bay, while handing her a container of that terrible xenon atmosphere coffee. I found it in the ship's cultural documentation when a Veth crew member was severely injured or dying. Historically, before they had the medical tech they have now, the ship would sound a specific frequency that meant we acknowledged this loss. The community was supposed to, he checked his notes, continue functioning in the presence of grief. Keep operating, not pretend the grief wasn't there. Maren looked at the coffee. She didn't drink it, and they adapted it for armistice ships, because they had to figure out what to do when their human liaison crew was in critical condition. And apparently what they decided was, Elon's voice went a little uncertain, the way it always did when he was about to say something he found genuinely surprising, that the right thing to do was to acknowledge it, with the ship, make the ship feel it too. Maren stood with that for a moment. Do they think we can hear it? She said. The frequency. I don't know. I mean, do they think it means the same thing to us? The sound. Elon was quiet. I found one other thing, he said. In the cultural documentation, when they adapted the frequency for mixed crew ships, there was an internal Veth council debate about whether to tell the human liaisons what it meant, and the final decision was, he checked again. The humans would probably understand it differently than it was intended, and that was okay. That the sound could mean different things to different listeners and still function correctly. It just needed to be present. The alarm was still running through the ship's PA. Quieter now. since Declan's stabilization, but present. Maren finally drank the coffee. It tasted like battery acid and mineral salt, and something she'd long since stopped trying to name. "Go check on deck," she said. "I need to talk to Thread." Thread was in what the Veth called the resonance room, a space near the ship's core that had no official function in any manifest Maren had ever filed, but which every Veth crew member seemed to use for something that looked, from the outside, like thinking. The room was small and dim, and the walls were lined with what appeared to be fossilized Veth neural tissue, actual biological material, preserved. Though the Veth didn't use that word, they called it remembered, which Maren had found unsettling until she'd understood what it was for. The Veth didn't meditate. They stood in rooms with their ancestors' preserved nervous systems and ran signal patterns through their own spines that the ancestors' tissue could, apparently, weakly echo. It wasn't communication. It wasn't memory retrieval. The closest word Thread had given her for it was calibration. Thread turned when she entered, spine lights shifting from a deep, slow pulse to something more alert. "Chief Liaison, you should be resting. I need to understand something." Thread regarded her. "Ask." "The reclassification," Maren said. "The war. The reason you fought it. We have spoken of this. We've spoken around it." She moved further into the room. The preserved tissue in the walls gave off a faint bioluminescence, not bright enough to see by, just enough to know it was there. "You fought it because you'd assessed us incorrectly. You thought we were." She searched for the diplomatic phrasing. "Gave up. Animals. A biological resource on a populated but pre-sapient world. And then something happened that told you we weren't." "This is accurate. What was the thing?" Maren said. "The specific thing. That told you we weren't animals." A long pause. Thread spine lights went through a sequence she hadn't seen before. Not the uncertain blue. Not the agitated violet. Not the controlled ambiguous calm. Something slower. Something that had, she thought, a texture to it. Like layers. "You sent a message," Thread said. Maren waited. "In the second year of the reclassification. When we had begun It paused. "The harvesting operations. In the equatorial regions of your primary continent, you had mounted significant defense. We had, in our assessment, begun to suppress it." Thread's eyes moved to the preserved tissue in the walls, then back to her. A signal arrived on a frequency we had flagged as potentially meaningful. It was not a military transmission. It was another pause, addressed to us. By name. By the designation we used for our own command fleet. Maren felt something go still in her chest. "How did we know your designation?" "We could not determine this at the time. We later theorized that your communication specialists had decoded enough of our transmission protocols to—" Thread stopped. Started again. The message said, "We know what you think we are. We are going to show you that you are wrong. We are going to keep showing you until you understand." The room was very quiet. Just the faint bioluminescence, the slow pulse of Thread's spine lights. "That was," Maren started. "It was another 4 years before we accepted the accuracy of the message," Thread said. "For years of what you call the reclassification. For years of—" Something moved through its spine lights, something fast and dark, of us being shown, as promised. It looked at her directly, all 4 eyes at once, which it almost never did. "Liaison Cha survival is not an irregularity to us in the way the Council's language suggested. The Council is frightened. It speaks formally when it is frightened. What we are actually experiencing is—" It searched, recognition. "We have encountered this before. The fact of your species continuing to exist in conditions we assess as untenable. We have encountered it before, and we do not have a better model for it now than we did then." "The message," Maren said. "Do you know who sent it?" "We researched it during the armistice negotiations. We identified the signals unit. Most of them did not survive the reclassification." Thread's voice was flat with the specific flatness she'd learned to read as the Veth form of grief. "One survived. She is elderly now, by your measure. She is not in diplomatic service. But she's alive. She is alive." Maren stood in the resonance room with the preserved ancestors on the walls and the faint sound of the sorrow frequency still running through the ship. They never got an answer, she said. The message. They sent it and kept fighting, and they never knew if it worked. They are alive, Thread said. The reclassification ended. The armistice exists. They, it seemed to weigh the next word, succeeded. That's not the same as knowing. Thread was quiet for a long moment. No, it said, it is not. Declan's recovery followed a curve that the Veth medical team found increasingly difficult to characterize as anything other than an anomaly in their records. On the third day, when the head medic's analysis predicted his tissue regeneration would plateau, it accelerated. On the fifth day, when the regeneration should have begun to show diminishing returns, it continued at the same rate. By the seventh day, the head medic had stopped making predictions and had instead begun sitting in a corner of the medical bay with a recording device and an expression. If Veth faces could be said to have expressions in any human legible sense of pure undisguised wonder. It's staring at you again, Maren said. I know, Declan said. He was sitting up now, eating actual solid food, Veth-adapted rations, the consistency of damp clay, tasting of nothing Maren had a word for, with the particular focused attention of a man who has recently remembered how much he enjoys being alive. I've named it. You've what? In my head, not out loud. I'm not stupid. He took another bite of the clay ration. I call observer. It has this quality, he gestured vaguely, of being genuinely invested. Like it's not just monitoring me. It actually wants to know how this ends. The head medic. You've named the head medic. Is that bad? It might be extremely culturally significant, and I don't know whether good or bad is even a relevant category. Declan considered this. Should I stop? Please don't tell it the name. I wasn't planning to. He set down the ration container. How's the report going? Maren had been writing the report for 4 days. It was currently 11,000 words long, which was approximately 9,000 words more than any previous incident report she'd filed, because the relay failure section kept generating subsidiary sections, and the subsidiary sections kept generating addendums, and the addendums kept circling back to a central question she hadn't managed to answer yet. It's going, she said. The authorization chain section is in the report. Did you write it accurately? I wrote it accurately. Declan nodded. He looked at her for a moment. You could have been the one in the suit, he said. That's not in the report. It's not relevant to the report. It's relevant to you. December. I'm just saying. He picked up the ration container again, put it down. I would have told you the same thing. It was a rotation call. You couldn't have predicted the conduit. The only way to prevent it would have been to not inspect the relay at all. And then in 6 months something worse happens, because nobody caught the fault progression. He looked at her steadily. You know this. I know this, she said. You're still feeling it. Yes. Good, he said, which was a very Declan thing to say. You should feel it. Means you're still paying attention. Just don't let it eat the part of you that makes decisions. The head medic observer, Maren found herself thinking against her better judgment, had moved closer during this conversation, as it tended to do whenever the two humans spoke in extended exchanges. She noticed it doing this from the beginning, listening to the translation color outputs, watching their body language, running its recording device at the elevated attention rate it used for novel data. The Veth medic, Declan said quietly. It doesn't just want to understand why I survived physically. No, it wants to understand the conversation. He gestured, searching. The other thing. The way we talked to each other when something bad happened. Maren looked at the medic. It stopped moving, spine lights cycling to a neutral tone, with the specific stillness of something that had just realized it was being observed. Maybe, Maren said, it's learning. Maybe we all are, Declan said. On the 9th day, Thread requested a formal meeting. This was unusual. Formal meetings had a specific structure on tessellate, predetermined agenda, representative attendance, translation protocol checks. Maren had attended perhaps 30 of them in 14 months. They tended to be procedural. Scheduling, maintenance, route modifications. This one had no agenda filed. Maren arrived at the bridge's formal conference space, a room that always struck her as slightly too large for any practical purpose, as if it had been designed for a different scale of meeting. To find Thread and two senior crew members already seated, their spine lights in coordinated patterns she didn't recognize. Elon was beside her. Declan was well enough to sit and now mobile, and had in fact, made an argument about his continued presence being a useful data point for whatever this is that Maren had found impossible to counter. He was beside her too, moving slowly, one hand on the chair rail. Thread began without preamble. We have submitted a preliminary report to the Joint Council regarding the relay incident and its subsequent medical developments. This report will be received in approximately 12 standard days. It paused. We wish to discuss its content with you before it arrives. What's in it? Maren said. Medical documentation of Liaison Cha's recovery. Analysis of variants from existing human biological models. Recommendation for expanded biological research protocols under Armistice Article 7. Thread's spine lights cycled. And a formal request for reclassification of human biological parameters in joint fleet assessment frameworks. Declan made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Reclassification, he said. Yes, of humanity. Of the documented survival parameters. The word is... Thread paused, and Maren thought she saw something in its spine lights that she'd only ever seen once before, in the resonance room. The word is the same word used to describe the war, the same root, reclassification. Another pause. We chose it deliberately. Maren looked at Thread. Because in our language, reclassification does not mean error correction. It means... Thread seemed to search for something in its own vocabulary. Spine lights going through that slow, layered sequence she'd seen only in the resonance room. It means that reality has provided new information, and the model must expand to include it. It is not the model's failure. It is the model's. It found the word growth. The conference room was quiet. Elon was writing something rapidly in his notes. Declan was looking at Thread with an expression Maren recognized as the one he wore when he was deciding whether something was worth saying. He said it. You fought a war with us, he said, and when you figured out you were wrong, you called that war reclassification. Yes, and now you want to use the same word for... He gestured at himself, at the residual paleness of vacuum exposure, at whatever was happening in his cells that the Veth couldn't model. This. Yes, Thread's voice was even. It is the same process. We encounter something we do not understand. We build a model. The model is insufficient. Reality provides new information. We expand the model. Its spine lights went to that ambiguous Comor suppression. The first reclassification cost many lives on both sides. We carry that. We will always carry that. We cannot undo it by using a different word for it. But we can. It stopped. Learn from it, Maren said. Be honest about what we are doing, Thread said, which is continuing to reclassify, continuing to discover that your species exceeds our models, not as a threat, not as a concealment. Its 4 eyes went to each of the 3 humans in sequence, as a fact we should document clearly, and build better models for. And then, the spine lights did something she'd never seen, a brief, rapid cascade from the deepest blue to the brightest amber and back, gone in under a second. Encounter again, when the new model is also insufficient. Elon had stopped writing. He was just looking at Thread. That's, he started. Our species, Thread said, has been reclassifying reality for 600,000 years. We are practiced at it. But you, the spine lights went to that strange layered slow pulse again. You practice it faster. You rebuild the model in hours. You rebuild it with whatever materials are present. Liaison Cha rebuilt it in a vacuum corridor with compromised biological systems and whatever. It paused. Whatever function he performed in that space, the function that kept him alive. He refused to stop, Maren said. That's the mechanism. That's human biology's dirty secret. We don't have a clean answer for when to stop, So sometimes we just... She looked at Declan. Don't. Declan looked back at her. That almost smile. The report says anomalous resilience response, he said, which is medically accurate and entirely misses the point. Emotional irrationality as a survival mechanism, Maren said. That's what I call it. We are, on a deep level, bad at accepting that certain things should be over. Sometimes it kills us. Sometimes, she nodded at him, it keeps us alive in places it shouldn't. Thread spine lights went amber, stayed there. This, it said, will require a very long addendum to the report. On the 11th day, something happened that hadn't been planned. Maren found the head medic, Observer. She couldn't stop thinking of it as Observer, standing outside the medical bay in the corridor, not moving, its recording device off, its spine lights and the slowest pulse she'd ever seen, not monitoring anything, not moving toward any destination, just standing. Is everything okay? She asked. The medic turned its 4 eyes to her, cycled through its focal points, said, through its translation collar, in a voice that was slightly lower than usual, I have a question. Okay, I have been monitoring the injured human for 11 days. I have documented his recovery in full biological detail. I understand the cellular mechanisms involved. I have updated my assessment models accordingly. A pause. I do not understand why I find this, it searched, moving. Maren looked at the medic. You find it moving, she said. This word moving is the translation system's approximation. The Veth word is closer to the sensation of having the model expand. The medic's spine lights pulsed once, deeply. We experience it rarely. When we encounter something so far outside our expected parameters that the expansion is another pause, physically perceptible, as a sensation. It looked at her steadily. I have experienced it 11 times in my career. All 11 times were encounters with human biological data. Maren felt something in her chest go very quiet. Observer, she said. She hadn't meant to say the name. It came out before she could stop it. The medic's spine lights flared briefly. Not alarm, not the agitated violet. The amber, warm and sudden. You have named me, it said. I'm sorry, that was in Veth practice, the medic said. A name given by another species is significant. It indicates, it considered, recognition. You have recognized something in me that merited designation. This is, the amber deepened, not a negative event. Maren stood in the corridor with a Veth medic whose spine lights were the color of something warm, and she thought about a woman she'd never met, elderly now, if she was still alive, a signal specialist who had spent a war shouting into a frequency she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. We know what you think we are. We're going to show you that you are wrong. We're going to keep showing you until you understand. Can I ask you something? Maren said, yes, before the armistice, during the reclassification. What did you think we were? Observer was quiet for a long time, long enough that Maren thought it might not answer. Then, we thought you were a localized biological phenomenon, sophisticated pattern, but its spine lights went to the uncertain blue, bounded, self-limiting, a species that would exhaust its parameters and stabilize at a predictable equilibrium. A pause. Every model we built assumed a ceiling, a point at which your expansion would slow, your adaptations would plateau, it searched for the word, your becoming would reach its final form. And every model was wrong. The blue cycled toward amber again, slowly. There's no ceiling we have been able to locate. Every time we find a limit, you exceed it, sometimes deliberately, sometimes. It looked toward the medical bay, toward the room where Declan was probably eating another clay ration and being quietly unreasonably alive, sometimes by accident, sometimes in circumstances that make the ceiling irrelevant. The amber held. We do not know if there is a ceiling. We suspect there is not. This is... The word it chose next came out in Veth, untranslated, because the translation system apparently didn't have an equivalent. This is the most significant thing we have learned in 600,000 years of encountering other species. What does that word mean? Maren said, the one that didn't translate. Observer's spine lights pulsed once. The closest approximation, it said, in your language, would be the thing that makes the model worth building. The ship's sorrow frequency went silent on the 12th day. Declan made the formal request himself, walked to the bridge, stood in front of the Veth communications array, and asked Thread to file the medical declaration that would end the alert. His voice was still rough. He moved carefully, with the particular deliberateness of a body recalibrating its own parameters. But he stood. Thread filed the declaration. The frequency ended. The silence it left behind was different from the silence that had preceded it, fuller somehow. Or maybe Maren was just tired enough that everything felt layered now. She was in her quarters, writing the final sections of the report when Elon knocked and came in without waiting, which meant something was happening, because Elon always waited. "I found her," he said. Maren looked up. The signal specialist. The one who sent the message. He had his data pad clutched in both hands, which he did when he was trying not to show how excited he was. "She's alive. She's 83. She lives in the Eastern Seaboard relocation settlements. She has a garden. She apparently teaches mathematics to children at a community center on Tuesday mornings." He took a breath. "I found her contact information." Maren looked at him for a long moment. "Elon, I know. It's outside the scope of the mission report." "That's not what I was going to say." He stopped. "I was going to ask," Maren said carefully, "what do you want to do with that information?" Elon was quiet. He looked at the data pad. He looked at her. "I want to tell her," he said. "I want to tell her it worked." A pause. That it's still working. That there's a Veth medic on this ship that felt its model expand 11 times, and all 11 times were because of us. He was gripping the data pad hard enough that his knuckles were pale. She sent that message and she never got an answer, and she deserves to know that someone was listening. Maren looked at this young man who had been on his first posting for 14 months, and who still forgot to close his expression sometimes, and who apparently spent crises doing research because he couldn't shut his brain off. "Write her a letter," Maren said, "from all three of us. Send it through official channels with the incident report. It's an attached human interest document. It's within protocol. Nobody will object." She picked up her own data pad. "I'll co-sign it." Elon let out a breath that had more in it than just air. "What do we say?" he said. Maren thought about this for a moment. About Declan standing in front of the communications array. About Observer's amber spine lights. About the resonance room and the preserved ancestors in the walls, and the war that had been named for the act of learning something new. About the sorrow frequency and how it could mean different things to different listeners and still function correctly. "Tell her," Maren said, "that we're still showing them, and they're still learning, and neither side has found the ceiling yet." She paused. "Tell her the model keeps expanding." The report was filed 17 days after the relay incident. It was 14,000 words, with 8 addendums, and it was going to generate an internal inquiry at the Joint Fleet Command level that would take approximately 6 months to resolve and result in approximately 11 procedural updates to the inspection protocols. Maren had written the authorization chain section accurately. She'd written the relay diagnostic assessment accurately. She'd written the part where she'd assigned Declan to the EVA, and he'd offered to go instead, and she'd said yes. She'd written that accurately, too. What she hadn't expected was the formal response that came back from the Joint Council before the inquiry even began. It arrived addressed to all 3 human liaisons and to Thread, and its subject line, in both Veth and Standard, read, "Regarding the reclassification of species-specific biological parameters, expanded protocol request, Armistice Article 7, with specific reference to documented events aboard JFF Tessellate." The first paragraph thanked them for the detailed documentation. The second paragraph confirmed that Article 7 biological research protocols would be expanded. The third paragraph, which was the one Maren read 3 times, said this: "The Joint Council notes with formal acknowledgement that the documented events represent the 14th recorded instance of human biological performance exceeding previously established assessment parameters since the signing of the armistice. The Council further notes that this pattern of exceedance is consistent with pre-armistice observations during the reclassification period and consistent with documentation reviewed by this body during the armistice negotiations themselves. The Council wishes to formally record that it does not currently possess a sufficient model for this pattern. The Council further wishes to formally record that this is not considered a problem. The Council considers the inability to fully model a partner species not as a failure of assessment, but as an ongoing condition of partnership. A species fully legible to its partners has nothing left to show them. The Council looks forward to continued reclassification. Maren sat with this for a while. Then she forwarded it to Declan, with no accompanying text. His reply came back 40 seconds later. Model keeps expanding. She forwarded it to Elon. His reply came back immediately. Sending the letter today. She sat in her quarters on a Veth ship in deep transit lanes, breathing air that was 11% higher in xenon than human optimal, listening to the silence where the sorrow frequency had been, and she thought about ceilings. How humans kept running into them. How they kept, with a frequency that defied every assessment model built by a species that had been modeling reality for 600,000 years, running straight through. Not heroically, not always on purpose, sometimes by accident in vacuum corridors, with compromised suit seals and whatever desperate irrational function the body performs when it hasn't been given permission to stop. Maren didn't have a word for this. She had a suspicion that Observer would have won, in Veth, untranslated, the thing that makes the model worth building. 8 months later, Maren received a message routed through official channels, attached as a personal addendum to a routine quarterly inspection report, forwarded 3 times before it reached her. It was from an 83-year-old woman in the eastern seaboard relocation settlements, who had a garden and taught mathematics on Tuesday mornings, and who had, 6 decades ago, spent a war sending messages into frequencies she didn't know were being heard. The message was 11 words long. Tell your Veth colleagues, I always knew someone was listening. Maren read it twice. Then she went to find Observer,